Okay, let's dig into this first etude of the Voxman book in C major. You notice the composer's name is Gallay, and he's written a good number of etudes and some solos for brass instruments. And I think we'll see his name again in the Voxman book. Voxman liked Gallay's etudes. This is a beautiful etude that is very song-like. I think it's probably a lament, even though it's in C major, even though it's in kind of a happy key. The first thing that you should notice about the first 8 bars is that the underlying melody is really simple. The first 4 bars are just ascending from G to C. Right? And then if you look at it from the 5th bar, where you reach the E, you have a double descent to G. And the note G is, we keep coming back to it for the first 16 bars. And every time you do, I think it's a really good idea to just recognize that as sort of a centered, easy note, a note that's very friendly. And that'll keep you from getting tight as you make ascents. It'll allow you to release anything that's happening with your body that's going to compromise your endurance. Because notice, the return to G, here's all the G's. We keep coming back to it. That's also, those G's are also very relaxed places in the phrase. All right. One of the basic things you need for the first 16 bars is this lip slur. That lip slur, if it's not working well for you, if it doesn't move freely, and if you don't click from note to note really when you intend to, then you're going to have trouble playing not only this phrase, but in the key of C. So if that slur isn't working, what you can do is just go from, say, 1 and 2 and start in a lower fingering. You can get the same interval. Right? Make that one smoother. So you get those 3 notes of your overtone series to be smooth and musical and vocal. That alone will take care of most of the challenges of the first 2 lines of this piece. There is, in the 3rd bar, is the first time you hit one of the ornaments in this piece, and you'll see that on the bottom, in the bottom of my edition at least, probably in yours too, they've written out the ornament. And if I just play the first note of the 32nd notes that they've written out, this is the ornament in the 3rd bar. If I just play the first of the 32nd notes, what I get is right? 1 and 2 and 3 to 1. Okay. Now I'm just going to fill in the space. Right? Don't worry about going on. Just get that ornament to work well for you. Or the other way you can do it is putting a little fermata on that last B of the ornament, of the 32nd notes. Okay, now I'm going to put the ornament on the E following that. that little chunk rhythmically correct and consistent before you introduce it into the whole phrase. It's okay to play the thing without the ornament in practice, but don't just fake the ornament as you're learning the piece. Learn the ornament in isolation, in the right rhythm, and then you'll be able to introduce it to the rest of the real notes of the phrase. Okay, second phrase is the same ornament. Then we have ornaments in the third line. When we get to the third line, the first bar has an ornament as well. Right? Once again, I would just, well, I guess this one I would learn a little differently. I would do this. You see what I did? I said E, F sharp, D sharp, F sharp, G. Because basically that's what your chops have to do to make this ornament work right, is that little slur. Now I'll fill in the open notes. Okay? Make sure you hear 3 eighth note pulses inside the first note. 1 and 2 and 3 and, right? But if you can't do this, you're going to have trouble playing that ornament. You'll have issues with the F speaking. Try that trill. E, F sharp, E, F sharp, E, F. You'll find that there's a break between those two notes. There's a little jump that requires an adjustment of air. Between E and D sharp is no problem. That'll probably come out about as fast as you can wiggle that valve. The E to F sharp is a different story. Okay, so is the key to making that ornament work. Now that we have the first maybe wide interval descent here. Right? I would buzz this section. And the way I would do that is this. Get that minor sixth accurate on the mouthpiece, and then you'll be making a good sound on both of those notes. And you probably need to practice. The G at the beginning of that bar, this is the second bar of the third line, the G and the F sharp are in the same place for the chops and air. The chops and air have no idea that you're changing notes, really. The only difference is the change in valve. That's what makes those two pitches different. So, as far as your chops are concerned, this is the same as. So keep in mind that the G and the F sharp are in the same place. And then you'll have no trouble getting to the F sharp from the B. Right? Okay, then the third beat of the second bar of the third line, you have what looks like a descent in D major, right? 3, 2, 1 in D. That's basically filling in the D major arpeggio. So look at the third line, second bar, and then the last full beat at the F sharp. And why don't we do this? Let's just play a D major scale from the F sharp down to the low D, because that's basically what this is doing. passage is just leaving some of those notes out and adding a C sharp. Make sure to get your trigger out for the D and C sharp before you get there. So I might pop that out, that third slide, for the low D and C sharp. I might pop that out during the F sharp. It's not going to affect any of the notes above it. Okay, I'm curious, for the leap between the D and the B, right before the first ending, it's possible to play that 1 and 3 for practice. Don't do this when you perform it, but that's a good thing to practice so that when you go to finger it correctly, it'll really slot beautifully. Don't get too high on that B, D, C sharp, D, B. I may have been a little sharp just then. I don't know if you noticed. But it's easy to make that interval too wide. Yeah, it might be a good idea to do this too. Add a fermata on the F sharp, the first space F sharp. Just to make sure that you're arriving at a really healthy sound. A lot of players, when they descend from this register, the sound they arrive on is not really opened up as much as it should. So add a fermata there a few times and make sure that's really sounding good. Check your D and C sharp on the tuner. Unless you're really, no unless. Just check your D and C sharp on the tuner. All right, line 4. Here we have another chromatic scale for the pickup into line 4. You may need a little trigger, first thumb trigger for that first A. Again, we have that B to E slur that we had in the third bar, which is physically equivalent to this, to just C to E. So you should play with that a little bit, not that fast. C, C, B, B, C. Play with that and make sure that slur is familiar and easy for you. Maybe buzz it, probably buzz it. This is a good time to mention, I probably should have mentioned first off, make sure you practice tonguing where the slur, tonguing and slurring as it's marked. Don't let any of that be random because it'll just infect your version of this and anything else like this that you learn. And then it'll take you twice as long to learn. Let's see, the third bar of this fourth line what that is this slur followed by this slur. So practice those slurs. Make sure those are working nicely for you. From that G in the 1, 2, 3, 4th bar of the fourth line, we've just got a descending scale, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then it continues to descend. It goes. So we've got a progression down from C back down to G, the opposite of what we had at the opening. play that, and just be aware as you're learning that phrase that that's all your chops have to do, that that's all your air has to do is make those 6 notes. If the phrase starts to feel any harder than that, then you're doing something you don't need to do. All right, the ornament in the second to last bar of the 4th line. Now we don't have the ornament written down for us at the bottom of the page. We just have to infer what the ornament is going to be from the earlier examples. So what the ornament is the primary note C, then an upper neighbor D, C, lower neighbor B. So C, D, C, B, and then return to the primary note. D, C, D, C, B, C, and then you finish the ornament. C, D, C, B, C, E, D, C. The rhythm is the same as the other ornaments. The half note on C becomes a dotted quarter note, just like in the examples below. I just pulsed the 8th notes, the 3 8th notes inside that dotted quarter. That way the ornament starts right on the 4th 8th note. Da, 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 dee, da, dee, da, dee, da, da. Maybe the trickiest coordination of that is getting from the last C, C, D, C, B, C, E, those last 2, C, E, that's a lip slur. So it's a little bit challenging to time. Practice it with that rhythm first. It's okay to do that kind of mechanically and get it to speak, get the E to speak precisely when you ask for it. Then it's a notch more challenging to do it without that pause. But not much more challenging. Once you have that easier version, the correct version is not so hard. The 5th line down, starting on an A. Again, the upper neighbor to the A is a B natural in this key. The lower neighbor to the A would be a G natural, right? But the sharp they've put under the ornament sign, under that what we call a turn. That's the term for that particular ornament, is a turn. And the sharp that they put under the turn sign indicates that the lower neighbor to the note A or G should have a sharp on it. So instead of playing we're gonna play a G sharp. That one's just a matter of finger coordination. You can neither the B nor the G sharp require you to change the air at all. You might see how fast you can do that evenly, and then the ornament won't feel so fast. Okay. Now we actually come to the thing that I find most challenging in the whole etude, which is that octave. I shouldn't tell you that. I shouldn't make things hard for you that aren't. But the descending octave leap down to the low A is, I find that I have to do 2 things to make that reliably work. 3 things. I have to make sure that I keep the rhythm absolutely honest. I'm subdividing in my mind. I'm going. feeling every 16th note before I get to that leap. That makes a huge difference. Often, when lip slurs don't work, when high notes don't speak, the issue is not that you don't have the chops or the range or what have you, or that you're not a good enough markswoman. It's that we're slightly out of rhythm. We're slightly early or slightly late, and then the fingers and the chops don't coordinate, and then things don't work. So that's the subdivision thing. And 3 and 1 E and a 2 E. Make sure that E speaks. That E happens exactly what you intend for it to. The second thing is to make sure that the A, second space A, is really centered and in tune, and that I sustain that with some energy. That I don't let that A decay or lose my attention before I do the octave slur. Because if I'm worried about the octave slur while I'm playing the upper A, if I'm worried about that octave slur and I'm not just sustaining the first A, then I won't have a good leaping off place. That causes problems. So you play the upper A really in tune and centered, and you don't move to the lower A until exactly the moment of the second 16th note of the second beat. And then finally, if you do both those things, then the low A is not as low as you may expect it to feel in the moment. This little exercise helped me a lot with this. First of all, I just replaced the I replaced that with this. Your fingers don't have to do anything. A, E, 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 A, right? And that feels pretty narrow. I don't feel like I have to do anything. I don't feel like I have to make my chops move. I don't have to change the air very much. Now, I tell myself that the low A is right next to that E. That it's not, what we know to be true is it's 5 notes away, right? But I lie to myself and say it's just like a step lower than the E. So I go. I basically feel like I'm making the interval between the upper A and the lower A only slightly wider than that between the A and the E. And I'll often find that I get to the low A. It's fine. Maybe I'll have to give my body a little more freedom to move and open up than that, but not much. So what I'm saying is most players, they dig too deep into the low register to make a wide descending leap like that, and then the low note is out of tune, doesn't speak very well, and sounds weird. So don't do that. Just make that low A no lower than it needs to be. All right. The second one. First, find those 3 notes. Mostly, I would be concerned that the C to E is in tune and that the E sounds good. Probably a lot of players miss the B flat to E interval. That will be a good chunk to play several times in a row. Right? Okay. Then you have a line break to the 6th line, and then often my students will just miss the B flat to G sharp because they don't transition from one line to the other, and because they're moving from a flat to a sharp. Right? All right, now we have ascending wide interval leaps, and we don't have the help of the tongue. I wouldn't start working on the A to A leap first. I would start with the F to F leap Again, we're in the 6th line. Now I'm looking at the 3rd bar, the end of the 3rd bar. You have an F to F leap. If that octave is giving you trouble, if you can't do that consistently, then the A is not going to work very well for you. So there's a few ways to approach this. Add an intermediate note, add a note between the 2 notes, so go. I just added a C between the Fs. F, C, F. Then move to a D as the middle note. Right? Then the E. Then you can take the middle note out. The other approach is, again, back to buzzing. Make sure you have a really slow, smooth, unbroken glissando between the bottom space F and the top line F. All right, and then we speed that up. Do a few of those, and then turn it into more of a rip. Maybe I should start. Often I have to have people start the bottom note a little softer. Okay. Also, working on octave slurred leaps, I wouldn't start with the dotted figure. I would just do even 8th notes. Get the octave working without worrying about the dotted 8/16th figure. Then the dotted 8/16th figure you should do in time and work your way up the scale. I would do each of those many times, not just one ascent on the scale, but I would go. I'm doing them too fast, too. We should do them slower. And work your way on up from there, making sure that each one is good before you move to the next higher note. If you do a thorough job on the octave leap between Fs, and then do the same thing on Gs, and then A. I'm skipping F sharp and G sharp just now. Really, you should do those two. Then you do the same thing to the A. I'm going too fast again. Then you'll train those for precision. It'd be good to do those with a metronome too. You really should do that with a metronome at a tempo at least that slow, so that your 16th notes are really precise. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. And you need to do the same thing. The end of the 6th line, you see there's an octave leap between D and D as well. Right? That one has its own problems. It's lower, but it's still not reliable for a lot of trumpet players. So at least that one you have a valve change to make. you should practice it without the valve change. The sixth line also has the first of a bunch of descending 16th note figures. Right? This is the next one. And then you need to make sure that the descending notes don't get low too fast. You'll tend to get below the notes, below the center of the notes as you're descending, and when we ascend, we tend to get above the center of the notes. That's a general tendency. The way to practice these, I suppose, I'm looking at I'm looking at the second bar of the sixth line. Is just to loop them up and down. That 16th note run is outlining what's called an A7 chord. It's all the chord notes 1, 3, 5, and 7 in the key of A, with the 7th lowered a half step to make it what we call a dominant chord. So that's a pattern you'll play many times in your life. Right? The one in the fourth bar is an F7 chord, a dominant chord. 1, flat 7, 5, 3, 1. If you hold down those four notes on a piano, you'll get a very satisfying dominant chord. So that's another one to loop. Okay. The second beat of the 7th line is the 7th line. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah. And the following bar is just a little different, feels a little different. That one you should definitely do this. You should go. Because the shape of that chord is just a little different. And if your chop snare try to do the same thing they just did for the first bar, it's not going to be quite centered. So then you can add the other note. Okay. The third bar of the 7th line. What it's actually doing is outlining an E major chord with the F added. The F doesn't actually belong to the chord. So do a few loops of E major. 1, 5, 3, 1, 3, 5, 1. And my low E, okay, the top space E and the bottom line E are pretty out of tune with each other because the top space E is usually flat. It needs a little bit of buoyancy, extra vibrance to make it center. The low E usually requires a little bit of first slide. That'll give you an octave that sounds right. That sounds better. I'm using about that much trigger. It's a lot. But coming from above like that, my aperture is a little smaller, so it's making the low E sharp, or sharper than it usually is. So if you recognize that second beat of the third measure of the 7th line, if you recognize that as E major, it'll be easier to play. The F is in the same place as the E, so get low enough that you get into that F. Play that slowly and make sure that's in tune. Okay. There's two more 16th note patterns. Okay. Again, those you should loop just like the others. I play down the pattern, and then I play back up backwards, if you want to think of it that way. All right. Now, the wide intervals in the 7th line they look harder than they are. In the first bar, it's a D to an E flat, right? At the beginning of the first bar of the 7th line, you've just played a second space D. When you slur up at the end of the bar, you're slurring up to exactly the same place. The E flat and the D are in the same spot on your chops and air. If I just go to a D, that blow and that feeling in the chops, it's the same. I just changed the valve to an E flat. Right? So your lip and your ear and your ear have a really fresh memory of where you're going. Don't try to find that E flat 16th note from the low D, thinking D to E flat, trying to find a leap of a minor ninth. That's a really bad idea. Just return to the chop and air balance that you started the bar in, and you'll find, and the E flat will pop out. Practice it without the dotted figure. Practice it as straight 8 notes first. Then you can make the rhythm the more challenging version. Okay. The next ascending slur feels very similar. Right? Again, I have the feeling when I go to that, I'm talking about the third bar now, when I go to that F natural, I still have the feeling of the previous E in my air and chops. And that'll allow me to, hopefully, slingshot back to that familiar feeling. And that concept will help you get through that whole line. When you arrive in the third line from the bottom, the 8th line down, but the third line from the bottom, you arrive on that A. Just feel as if you're playing 3, 2, 1 in F major. Mi, re, do. Then you have that descending 6th leap. Descending minor 6th are notoriously hard for people to find. Mi, re, do. Find a glissando between those two notes. Find a glissando on the mouthpiece, and then transfer that the precision of that glissando to the trumpet. Now, if that was if I leave the A out, it's actually very easy to play, right? Now, instead of putting the A back in, let's put a B natural. Get that to feel good, and then adding the A will making that B into an A is no problem. And you'll notice I'm starting to trigger my first slide. That probably will be necessary here. In fact, you could leave that slide out for the entire bar. And everything actually speaks easier. Okay, then we have another ornament. Again, it's the same turn we've been playing before in the etude. You want to add an upper neighbor, a lower neighbor, and then return to the primary note. So C, D, C, B, C is the ornament. C, D, C, B, C, E, D, C. I should do these in slow-mo for you as well. It's okay to play them really slow to feel secure that you know what you're doing, and then you can speed them up and kind of throw them in the way that makes an ornament sound like an ornament. Okay, and then in the third line from the bottom, you return to the same theme as the beginning. So I don't really need to rehash that again. When you get to the second to last bar of the third line from the bottom, you'll notice again that there's a sharp underneath the turn. That explains the A sharp that you need that's in the example at the bottom of the page. Notice that in the second bar of the second to last line, they've changed 2/16 notes into a triplet. So that's also kind of an ornament. It's written out, but that's what it's there for. Okay. When we get to the last three bars of the second to last line, we just get a series of those ornaments. Right? So I'm going to sing those in slow-mo in good time this time, in real rhythm. G, A, G, F, G, C, G, A, B, A, G, A, D, A, B, C, B, A, B, E, D, D, C. Hopefully you can play that along with my singing and track where everything should lay in those turns. You should also play this phrase without the turns just to get the lip slurs to work. Because that interval of a fourth needs to sound healthy. Okay, the first bar of the last line has a slur from C to the G at the top of the staff. So I would definitely practice that in all 7 valve positions. That's a slur you're going to need in your life between those two partials. Again, if that slur isn't working for you, you play it in the lower finger positions, but you also do the glissando on the mouthpiece that I've been doing. Really well-fueled, vibrant glissando, and that slur will start to work for you. So a lot of it's the timing. This figure we have all the way through, the dotted figure on the third beat of a 3/4 bar, T, re, T, that slur then tongue, T, re, T. That's just kind of ornery. It requires really precise rhythm and time to slip the tongue into the downbeat. So just be aware of that recurrent challenge and do all those figures and all those intervals that have that rhythm rather slowly and precisely. That's totally worth the time. Okay. You might notice I slowed down that last phrase. I think it gives it a little drama at the end. I've been talking about a lot of really, a lot of technical details so far. The etude also, what I've neglected as I'm talking about how to play the thing on the trumpet, is the musical side of what we're doing. So I'm about to go over the whole etude again in a more broad way and talk about what the musical moments are. The first phrase at the top starts with these chromatic passing notes. Realize that that's creating suspense, that kind of chromatic movement is supposed to create suspense. It also makes a very smooth line, so that when you get to the fourth bar and you have the wide interval all of a sudden, I like to make that a little bit more resolved, a little more extroverted, because it's a moment of contrast from what's come before. Try not to breathe. Take a good full breath, full relaxed breath at the beginning, and try not to breathe until the first breath mark at the end of the first line, like I just did. That's going to require that you start pretty soft and that you don't get super loud. Okay, then the first bar of the second line is a more active. This phrase is more active now. I find that descending arpeggio a little hard to control. Don't worry about it being too soft. Just let the descent give you the decay you want at the end of that phrase. Then you resume again as soft as before. I think that, but the next phrase, going into the third line, it goes farther dynamically, and it's a more active phrase than the previous consequent phrase. These phrases, okay, paired phrases, you call the first one the antecedent phrase, and the answering phrase the consequent phrase. So the first consequent phrase starts in pick up to the fifth bar. The second consequent phrase starts in the pick up to the third line. That second consequent phrase is more active than the first one, and we should play it with more energy, maybe a little louder. Don't get soft too fast in your descent there from the F sharp down to the low D. You can keep some volume because the descent itself will give you a feeling of decrescendo. Keep the energy as you descend. Okay, now into the fourth line, you may have noticed I pick up the tempo a little bit. We just made a little bit of big drama in the third line, so now I'm going to play the beginning of the fourth line. I think it has a little bit of a less serious sound to it. I'll often play the longer notes a little rhythmically long. I mean, I stretched out that G and F at the end of that phrase. I find that creates suspense, and it makes the climax of the phrase have more presence or more suspense. So I'm very aware of building energy into the fourth bar of the fourth line, and then of releasing that energy so that we arrive at the pianissimo in the second line in the second bar of the fifth line. And then I take time with that chromatic entrance, that chromatic ascent, approaching that descending leap that I was whining about before. Underneath that passage, you have poco a poco crescendo e accelerando. So literally translates little by little, louder and faster. So that's what I tried to do just now. Don't get bogged down in that passage. Okay, so the fifth bar down, the fifth line down, second bar, you've got that chromatic ascent, and at that moment you're in a really comfy place on the instrument. You just played a bunch of things that maybe have started to get you in a position where you're compromising your endurance or whatever. Just try to relax musically there and feel really comfortable. That really has the energy of speaking softly. And the challenge here is to make that octave leap not too active. You don't want that to sound... You don't want it to pop out. You want it to be... It would be great if it sounded like a string instrument just changing to a note on another string where the bow is still in motion and they just tilt that string and the tilt the bow and another string speaks. So it's so there's no bump there. So you should maybe practice looping it just like that and make it a casual gesture, not a gesture with a lot of muscle. Because that's the beginning of a long progression of gaining energy. In my recording this, a lot of last notes were not as long as I'd like them to be. If you can do it, if you have the air left, make the last notes a little long and luxurious. And you can take a little time to do that. When you reach the a tempo in the sixth line down, that's suddenly more heroic, and you can articulate more firmly there. next ascent. This is the last two notes of the sixth line down. It's scary to start that very soft, but challenge yourself to do that. Challenge yourself to start with a sound that's more covered. What I'm thinking musically through there is really this. Okay, that line is in my ear as I'm playing a lot of other things, as I'm playing what's on the page. And you know, this always bothered me, the third line from the bottom. You've got the rallentando on the third beat, but I feel like the peak of energy is the beginning of that bar, the first bar of the third line from the bottom. So I want to pull back and lengthen those notes some. I want the rallentando to be on the first bar of the third line from the bottom. So I would go ahead and take that liberty if I were you. All right. When the theme from the beginning comes back again, I make a rallentando into that. That feels necessary, and it makes the tempo one sound like an event. The things are the same as the beginning until the last three bars of the second to last line. I slow down the tempo for the last phrase to add finality or gravitas. I like that word. All right, so I hope this is helpful in your preparation of this etude. Some approaches that are both physical and musical. And I look forward to presenting all the etudes in this book in the coming weeks. Thanks for listening.